So, dann machen wir mal weiter. Hearing his name, Soichiro came to his senses. His stunned gaze shook loose. He took a deep breath to clear his head. Chucking it up to nerves, Mr. Yamashiro broke out a smile and turned to the girl standing beside him.
紹介するよ。彼が転入生のしずき宗十郎くん。で、こっちの彼女がしずきくんの案内役。うちの生徒会長で休日を押して新しい仲間の案内役を買って出てくれた青崎青子くんだ。
Having been introduced by Yamashiro, the girl took a step forward. Her eyes were merciless. Her stare, an unspoken threat to violently trample her opponent. Soichiro, on the other hand, managed to keep his own composure despite the shock at how confrontational she appeared. He had never been greeted quite like this before, but supposed, mistakenly, that this was how people treated each other in the city. The exchange must have looked quite dramatic to an onlooker. A girl ready to brawl. An earnest country boy, desperate to understand. It was a murderous limbo, especially for anyone in the room with them. Like Mr. Yamashiro, for example. While he had thought he had made the right decision in choosing an honor student to help him out, she was in an inexplicable bad mood, and the tension in the air was undeniable. It was at this moment that he realized he fucked up. His realization had come far too late. One false move, and this girl, for whom no problem was too large, would be becoming a storm that would rock the very foundation of the school. Just as the almighty Joker card could bring either fortune or disaster, the sole teacher who had been present at the time would come to bear the blame of the scandal that ensued.
いけてる。二人とも気は合うようだね。
Okay, ja, das waren die falschen Worte.
僕はこの辺でいいかな。
Mr. Yamashiro laughed nervously as he crept towards the door.
僕は職員室にいるから終わったら来るように。いいかい、青崎くん。くれぐれもだぜ。なんていうか、生徒会長としての度量の広さをこの際僕に信じさせてほしいかな。
Mr. Yamashiro left, leaving the two in a locked-eyes state. One in which one set of eyes was doing all the glaring. Aoko wahrscheinlich. All that remained in the room was a naive boy. And a cross-armed guarded girl. The two lingered in silence. They resembled shogi players agonizing over their first moves, though ultimately it was only Aoko that had considered the scene that carefully. She decided to put her irritation aside for the time being. With no reason to feel revulsion for him in the first place, she sighed deeply and faced Soichiro.
まあいいわ。山城先生がヒルアンドンなのは今に始まったことじゃないし。それで、あなた名前は？
Her tone was nothing if not reproachful, though he had done nothing to offend her. But the boy failed to pick up on it. Incapable of such venom himself.
ああ、
静木宗十郎かな。君は青崎さんだったね。
For whatever reason, he came across as happy in his response.
さんはいいわ、柄じゃないから。こっちはしずきくんでいい？
いいって何が？
だから呼び方。くんづけでいいかって聞いてるの。何よ、おかしなこと言った？私。
いや、すごく。
The boy replied immediately, as if it was a natural response, but quickly second-guessed himself.
いや、いいんだ。ごく一般的なんだろう。しずきくんで頼む。君は青崎でいいんだよな。
よろしく。
She followed her blunt reply with a swift turn away from him. While she was hardly thrilled at the prospect of the task at hand, it had been entrusted to her, and it was her personal policy to see it through to the end.
悪いけど、優しくしてあげる気はないから。時間も惜しいし、手早く行くわよ。
それは助かる。やっぱり時間は大切だ。
Aoko's blunt answer was lost on him once again. Humans tend to be overly conscious about being ignored, whatever form that takes. But despite being peeved at landing none of her attacks, Aoko did her best to act professional and directed her guest into the hallway. There was no sunlight in the hallway, nor any sign of life. This was more like a prison than the cave that was the meeting room. As it dawned on Aoko that the hallway matched her mood, she sighed once again.
まず聞いておくけど、山城先生から聞いたことは理解してる？
ああ、学校の仕組みについては分かった。この建物全部に同い年の人間がいるなんてちょっと想像できないけど。
そう、よかったわね。
Aoko rubbed her forehead. This Soichiro kid had no idea what he was in for. Apparently, all he'd heard about school was that it was a place where a lot of people met to study. High school teachers imparted to students their knowledge in various fields of study, while fostering disciplines and creativity. But never did Aoko imagine that she would have to explain the concept of school itself to someone. Yes, fundamentals were important, but this was absurd. She had serious doubts whether he could even handle classes, but Mr. Yamashiro insisted that things would work out somehow. Soichiro had managed to pass the transfer exam after all. Barely.
ま、私には関係ないけど。
Aoko grumbled mentally as she walked down the hallway. She consoled herself with the fact that today would be the only day she'd spent with this boy out of time, or at least she tried to keep it that way. Das bezweifle ich sehr.
青崎、
He asked calmly, trying to get her attention.
何？
こっちも一つ聞いていいかな。
だから何？
俺の気のせいだと思うんだが、君はまるで何かを睨んでいるように見える。やはり今朝は悪いものでも。
Oh, hat sie durchschaut? His gaze revealed earnest concern, as if asking her if she'd remembered to eat breakfast. Anscheinend die falschen Worte. It was like another hammer to her head. It was true that Aoko had been glaring at Sojiro the entire time. Glaring red-hot daggers, in fact. Not just at him, but the universe. Even on her best day, her roommate used to remark,
青子の視線は普通の人には厳しいわ。もう少し多くのことに寛大になるべきね。
She'd been warned that her emotions were so naked on her face that people treated her like a powder keg. How naive could the boy be that he could not pick up on this?
私をバカにしてるってわけじゃなさそうよね、この場合。
Even she found her own attempt to reassure herself unconvincing. It began to dawn on Aoko far too late that compared to her, this laid-back transfer student might as well have been from another planet.
いいわ。言葉にしないとわからないようだから言うけど、まるでじゃなくて、ズバリそうなの。あなたの気のせいじゃなくて、私は視線で遠回しに感情を表現してたの。いちいち声に出すのも、会話にするのも面倒だから。
In response to her words, the Martian clapped his hands together.
なるほど。どうしてそうしたいのかはわからないが、確かにそっちの方が手っ取り早い意思表現だ。
Sojiro accepted her reasoning without argument, though he still had no idea what kinds of emotions she was trying to express. It was as if he could hear her words but didn't grasp the meaning. Ideas that should have connected were instead separated into blocks.
確かにずれてるわ、こいつ。
Mr. Yamashiro's words made sense to her now. What was odd about this boy went way beyond naivety. A stranger in a strange land he may be, but it was only civilized to forgive him some jet lag-induced confusion.
じゃ、とりあえずあなたの教室に行くから。
She had regained her composure. Sojiro raised his hand and stopped in his tracks.
あと一つ。
Aoko waited Sojiro to continue. The boy was patient to a fault. She rubbed her forehead with her hand again, nursing a vague feeling of uneasiness.
これもちょっとした疑問なんだが、なんで君は怒ってるんだ？怒るのが商売とか、そういう家柄の人なのか？
Does it run in your family? A long silence. Though she knew it wouldn't change the situation, she remembered her regret at answering the phone that morning. He meant no harm. She repeated this thought like a mantra in an attempt to keep her impulses in check.
別にあなたのせいじゃないから気にする必要はないわ。ただ、この一瞬とお昼まで眠っていた場合を計りにかけたら、あまりに利益の違いがあって頭を抱えただけよ。
With that vague answer, she started to walk again, and turned her gaze away from this rude stranger named Sojiro Shizuki. While what constitutes normal is certainly up for debate, most would undoubtedly refer to him as so. He was a simple and nice boy with nondescript features. If he were an ice cream flavor, he would be vanilla. And Sojiro found Aoko to be very businesslike and full of life. There was a certain purpose to her movements, as they began and ended in an orderly fashion. The way her finger raised when she pointed at things, the way she made her way across the hallways and classrooms, the way she would occasionally glance back at him to make sure he was keeping pace. Each and every movement was so impressive that he couldn't take his eyes off her. Aoko showed him to his homeroom Class C of the 11th grade. The room certainly displayed more of a human touch than the previous meeting room, but Soichiro was none the wiser as to its functions. Aoko gave a brief explanation before they visited individual subject classrooms, as well as the gym, cafeteria, locker room, and school infirmary. Soichiro asked so many questions that much time passed before they reached the AV room on the second floor.
まずいな。
Soichiro stopped, looking genuinely concerned.
あと20分経つと1時だ。
嘘でしょ？うちの校舎そんな広くないわよ。
The tour had begun around 10, which meant that 3 hours had passed. A tour of a school shouldn't take anywhere near that long.
そうだったわね。行く先々で根掘り葉掘り聞かれちゃ、そりゃ何時間でも経つわ。
Aoko glared at Soichiro. She was being sarcastic, of course, knowing full well he would never pick up on it. To her surprise, he looked down apologetically, unable to hide his dejection.
なんだこいつ。ちゃんとしてるっちゃ。
The guy before her now was nothing like earlier. In contrast to seeing his once impenetrable veneer when they first met, she found herself feeling sympathetic. Momentarily, at least, until her irritation returned in full force.
で、何がまずいの？覚えることが多すぎてパンクしたなんて言わないでね。
いや、それもあるけど、学校のことは別にして1時になるとまずいんだ。
Soichiro's gaze wandered as if worried about something. If he was worried about the weather, he would have a hard time seeing it as there were no windows in this hallway.
へえ、時間を気にするってことは用事があるのね。そう。人の予定を引っかき回しておいて、自分だけ好きなようにやろうって言うんだ。なんだ、顔に似合わずいい人ね、君。
Was davon hat sie laut ausgesprochen.
いや、褒めても何も出ないぞ。
誰も褒めちゃいないわよ。
She yelled at him, unable to hold back her fury.
で？
それで、一体何の用なの？
Soichiro's face lit up as he finally understood what she was asking him.
そこは秘密にしておきたい。
Oh, ein Geheimnis, he said with a perfectly straight face.
慣れ始めたつもりだったけど、こいつのこういったテンポには失神しそうになるわ。
Her frustration was natural. Still, she did everything she could to stifle her feelings and fake a smile.
しずきくん？
She took a step forward.
秘密だってば。
Feeling the mood change drastically, Soichiro took a step back. And another. And another. No matter how many steps he took back, she kept edging towards him. She was smiling, but he thought he could see the blood boiling beneath her skin.
これ最後の質問にしとくわね。あなた私をからかって楽しい？
Pass auf, was du sagst. He had no intention of mocking her, though at this point he doubted presenting any evidence to prove his would do much to erase that forced smile on her face.
分かった。説明する。
His arms raised in surrender. She halted her advance and freed her face from that unseemly smile.
実は1時からアルバイトがあるんだ。でもここはそういうの禁止なんだろ？
そうだけど、あ、禁止されてるから秘密にしようと思ったの？バカね。それなら許可さえ下りていれば問題ないわよ。
知ってる。試験の時に許可はもらってる。
へえ。
Aoko's face lit up as she realized he might not be the piece of work she thought him to be. Yet,
しかし許可は一つしかもらえなかった。
at mehrere?
一つって、あなた掛け持ちでバイトしてるの？
これでも2件減らしたんだ。生活費だけで大変なのに学費まで稼がなくちゃいけない。なのに働き先は一つだけというのはあんまりだと思わないか？
Oh Gott, ich weiß, worauf das hinausläuft.
いや、あんまりなのはあなたの方だと思うけど。
Though still irritated, her opinion of him changed a little. She was impressed that he was able to take care of his tuition and living expenses all on his own. She could also empathize with having no time to oneself. Her anger began to subside. The words part-time job were about the last things she ever expected to hear out of this country boy's mouth.
そういうことなら仕方ないわね。いいわ、行きなさいよ。事情は分かったから。
青崎はいいのか？
She had no idea what this question meant, but she at least understood he was trying to be considerate, which also took her by surprise. She figured he'd be just as dense about people's feeling as he was about everything else.
別に、私もこのまま帰るから。
First, though, she thought it best that they both stop by the faculty room. Mr. Yamashiro had mentioned that the transfer procedure had already been completed, so all that remained was for him to sign off on her duties.
先生、案内終わりました。
それはお疲れ様。しずきくんもお疲れ様。それで校舎を回った感想はどうかな？
ありがとうございます。なんというかとても学校ですね。
そうかそうか。うん、明日から頑張りなさい。
She had no interest whatsoever in this pointless read-up meeting.
山城先生のことは気にしないでいいわ。教え子に厄介なことを押し付けてふんぞり返っているぐらい職員室が好きなんだから、何時間でも待ってるでしょ。いえ、待ってるべきじゃない？
そうか。青崎がいいんならいいんだな。
ん？
There it was again. Whatever Soichiro was getting at, Aoko had no idea.
それじゃ行くよ。今日はありがとう。
今日だけよ、今日だけ。
She shooed him away with her hands. His face being bent to a broad smile, as if he found the gesture endearing. It was a softer expression than she had grown accustomed to seeing out of him. It was the kind of smile that would make anyone smile back. Well, most people at least. Aoko Aozaki didn't betray the slightest hint of a smile.
それじゃあまた。
And with that friendly farewell, Sojiro walked towards the end of the hallway. Or she thought, before he turned into the next class over. Sojiro headed straight for one of the classroom's windows, whereupon he opened it with ease. The chilly November air filled the room as the soft sounds of the rain doubled in volume. In that instant, she realized his intention. With opening the window, she really wished she hadn't.
いや、待て待て待て
He already had one leg out of the window when she dashed to stop him.
何するつもりよ、あんたは。
何ってアルバイトに行くんだけど。
その窓は人が出入りするところじゃないの。
This is Superman oder was?
だいたいここ何階だと思ってるの？
She saw the light of understanding dawn in his eyes.
死ぬところだった。2階から降りたら危なすぎる。
What the fuck?
危ないのはあんたの頭。
Her insult went right over his head.
あのね、こっちじゃ窓から人は出入りしないの。さっき言っとくべきだったわ。
知ってるよ。時間がないんで慌ててたんだ。ありがとう。これからは気をつける。
He pulled his leg back inside and closed the window. His school uniform was soaking wet from the rain.
いいけど、私は別に。あなたがどこから外に出ようが関係ないもの。ただ、できれば私の前ではやらないでほしいだけよ。
That's so ein dummes Grinsen im Gesicht.
それより、あなた、本当に明日から学校に来るの？
来るよ。不安だけど案内してもらったし。
He bid her farewell before running away down the hallway. She hoped he would walk down the stairs and leave through the school entrance like a normal person.
大丈夫なのか？あんなんで。
The image of him disappearing into the distance popped into her head in spite of her ire. She had no intention of spending any more time with him, and yet she felt strangely anxious. She couldn't tell if the feeling was fueled by concern or irritation. Why had she even gotten angry with this insignificant transfer student in this first place? A strange day with a strange transfer student, resulting in a strange emotion. Her head tilted as she reflected on what should have been a more enjoyable day than the irritating experience she just had.
いっか。どうせこれっきりなんだし。
The sound of rain echoed quietly all around her. The grey sky seemed frozen in time. It was impossible to discern whether it was morning or evening. Mr. Yamashiro and Aoko were likely the only ones left at school. The unlit classroom looked overly gloomy and ominous as Aoko stood in it alone. She pulled up her left sleeve. Her dainty, unremarkable watch showed that it was almost 1 o'clock.
時間合ってる？
She looked out the window at the grounds below. She saw a boy in uniform running through the rain without an umbrella. A sight she must have seen before, but for whatever reason affected her far more than she wished. Aoko did not stop by the faculty room before heading home. While Mr. Yamashiro's offer to drive her home was tempting, she decided it would ultimately be far more satisfying to ruin his day just as he had hers. She walked as quietly as she could towards the entrance and opened her bright red umbrella. As she had predicted that morning, the rain was waning in the afternoon. At this rate, it would probably cease completely in an hour or so. The distant sunshine would likely have reached her by the time she arrived home.
ま、それも悪くないか。
She shrugged her shoulders in resignation. She neither liked or disliked rain, but she found herself enjoying her walk home with her red umbrella in hand. The teachers at Misaki High School weren't fond of bright colors, so Aoko's red umbrella was an unusual sight. A ghost story about how the umbrella was once pure white had been making the rounds, but it featured Aoko instead of a ghost. It was with that umbrella that she made her way towards Misaki Station. The private Misaki High School got its name from the town of the same name. The area was once a sprawl of farmland and woodland, but rapid growth over the last 10 years had led to unprecedented modernization. There were some who thought to preserve Misaki's natural treasures.
残すことには賛成ですが、それでは残すだけになってしまうでしょう。
With those words, the mayor snuffed out the voices of the minority and ushered in a long-term plan for new urban development. More than enough funds for the urban development were collected, and the unassuming town of Misaki became the largest municipality of Misaki City in merely 10 years. Even though it lacked the modernity of neighboring Yashigurogi or the elegance of Misaki Hills.
それも当然よね。どういじくっても、もともとが山中の宿場町だし、山ごと切り崩すって言うんなら別だけど。
Urbanization had been contained to the lowlands around the station, with most of the hills and mountains still standing as they did 10 years prior. The exhaustion of funds succeeded in protecting the old Misaki, where the citizens could not. It became a truly odd suburban town, welcoming an increasingly urban population with its vestiges of old country charm. Misaki High School was a private school, established long before the town's current state. The original campus, built 50 years ago, was located high up in the mountains, making its current location its second incarnation. The path to the old grounds was remote, steep, and also well-trodden by animals. For these reasons, among others, Misaki High School had been shuttered until almost 20 years ago, when it received a donation from a department store chain that allowed for the construction of a new campus in the city. And thus, Misaki High School reopened its doors, the old woodland campus forgotten. In fact, most of the students attending Misaki High School were not from Misaki at all. The haughty, rustic people of this country town preferred prefectural schools to private ones. Truth be told, Aoko herself was one of them. All she had wanted after junior high was to move to Tokyo, where she hoped to spend her days enjoying live music on her way to entering a public university. But her hopes were dashed with her sister's departure, so here she was, walking alone in town, with only a red umbrella to keep her company, on what should have been a day off.
思い返してみると、私の人生ってなんか災難続きっぽい。
Her frustration evaporated into the cold December air.
でもま、いっか。退屈だけはしないわけだし。
With those words, her mood brightened a bit as she left the school in her wake. The busier part of town met her at the bottom of the gently sloping road. Misaki's train station was brand new, once looking no prettier than an abandoned factory. It had been renovated into a multi-purpose structure with huge department stores on its east and west sides. When the department stores first opened, Aoko and her friends had been impressed with their modern feel, but in time the stores too became dated. She had no shopping to do today, so she passed them by. What she really wanted to do was rest at a cafe, but she fought the urge, knowing her roommate would never let her hear the end of it if she frittered away her money. She looked back and blinked. For just a moment, she could have sworn she had seen someone suspicious in a red dress out of the corner of her eye. It must have been her imagination. The sixth sense chill she was experiencing down her spine was a familiar one at this point. She continued her walk home, brushing off the event as if it had never happened. In time, the chill faded, and all that was left was the sound of the town. She sighed heavily. Had she imagined it? Even if it had all been in her head, she was far from comfortable with the feeling that still lingered.
夏場の方ってもう少しこう。
Ein stalker? She grumbled under her breath.
波乱万丈、商売繁盛、諸行無常と。そうそう、忙しさに愚痴を言っても始まらないわ。
Unfortunately, summer and bugs go hand in hand. She could see how bugs could be drawn to all the sweet fruit. Rank with grease and heat, the kitchen was closed for the time being. The lunch rush had come and gone, but one last battle remained: dinner time. Only after the evening cars could the kitchen crew remove their white armor and call it a day. In the midst of the war zone was a lone newcomer.
これ着るんですか？
His voice was uneasy, betraying how new he was.
気持ちはわかる。俺もどうかと思うけど、店長の言うことだからもう笑顔で乗り越えてくれ。これも商店街の明日のためなんだとよ。
His bright orange co-worker clasps his hand together, as if to beg for forgiveness, as he saddled him with this unreasonable task. "10 years ago, Misaki City was a town of farm and woodland. But everything had changed. The front of the station was now lined with tall, multi-story buildings, and the residential areas were similarly full of apartment complexes. The once rustic scenery around the station had long become a thing of the past. Shiroi Nusuka was the only place in the city that still contained vestiges of the old town, a pocket of the past inside an urban jungle. The road extended up a conspicuously high hill to an old residential district far from the hustle and bustle of the train station. Long ago, it had been considered unwise to build on high ground, so nobody lived above a certain elevation. Shiroi Nusuka, sitting as it did atop a hill in the middle of town, was no exception to that convention and had no residences to speak of. The asphalt continued for some time, eventually giving way to a mountain road that was swallowed into the cover of trees. A lone vending machine stood to mark the boundary between town and beyond. Even the children knew that there was nothing beyond the new playground in development that so enthralled them. Well, that was not entirely true. There was nothing besides the haunted house. Aoko Aosaki traversed the long slope. Ah, schon wieder zu Aoko. Ich dachte, wir bleiben jetzt. Below her, she could see the whole of Misaki. The symmetrical town looked like a miniature set from this height. It would look like a painting if there had been a sea next to it, but unfortunately, Misaki City was very much landlocked. While it was overcast at the moment, the scene that was quite breathtaking on clear evenings. That view was the one thing that made the arduous climb worthwhile, and today she had been denied even that.
ああ、雨の日は自転車も使えないし、1日に2回ぐらいバスでも通ってくれないもんかな、ほんと。
Aoko had been using this road to get to school for almost 2 years now, but the journey had never gotten easier.
あれ、鍵閉まったまま？
Ausgesperrt.
アリス、まだ帰ってきてないんだ。
With a very shrug, she put her hand on the rusty iron fence. Quietly, the heavy gate swung open, as if to welcome her home. There sits atop that hill a haunted house. That is how the story much shared around town used to begin. But fresh rumors about the house had sprung to life almost as fast as the town's modernization. Despite being dilapidated and abandoned for many years, lights can be seen inside the house at night. An angry murder of crows often gather atop the hill before mysteriously vanishing. Children get lost in the fog never to be seen again. Late at night, a shrieking sound can be heard all the way to town. This particular piece of slender was the one Aoko wished to discredit the most. The final rumor was of an eye-catching luxury car that sometimes made its way up and down the hill. Oh? The rumors spread and grew by the day. And while they grew, the house that everyone thought had rotted away was restored over the recent years. Deep in a wood, on top of a hill no one dared to approach. Like a ruin shrouded from view, even the brightest of days, stood a relic out of time, a building from a fairy tale. The house was die Kuanji Mansion. Fairy Tale wieder. Ist das Haus ihres Großvaters? Everyone in town knew about the witch's house on the hill. The unabashedly haunted house where Aoko Aosaki resided for reasons unknown. Needless to say, it was not really haunted. The Kuanji family home was the Kuanji family home was a grand Western-style mansion with a long and storied history, stretching all the way back to England. It was too small to be a dormitory, yet too big to be called a house. The main building contained as many as 3 normal houses worth of rooms and was surrounded by a large, all-encompassing country yard. The perimeter of the grounds was surrounded by a high iron fence, covered in thorny vines. There was also an annex to the main building. Given such extravagance, it was no wonder that it inspired rumors. To the town's residents, the mere existence of such a lavish and out-of-place mansion on top of the hill was a cause for suspicion. Rumors, lies, and slander were the price to be paid for fame. With only 2 lodgers, it was hard to disagree with the perception that vampires must be living here.
ま、私はともかく、アリスはそういうのやりかねないし。
Ein Vampir, okay. She put her hand on the front door. It was a grand double door that would have paired well with a brass lock, and yet it was secured with little more than a simple keyhole. Pushing it open with one hand, she entered the supposedly haunted house. And by the way, if vampires were not enough to scare you, ghosts were known to appear on certain nights. Much like the weather outside, the foyer was overcast with shades of grey. Perhaps deliberately designed, the architect had chosen not to include any lights in the entrance area. The ceiling was 2 floors high. The only light in the room came from the skylight. It was particularly gloomy on rainy days. On moonless nights, it was like the world itself ceased to be. Naoko decided the drawing room to the east would be a good place to rest, but knowing that she would not be able to relax until she changed clothes, she started up the stairs. The stairs curled up the walls to the 2nd floor hall. There was a 3rd floor attic as well, accessible from the far end of the hall. She had never set foot in there in the 2 years she had lived here, though. The Kuanji mansion was more or less divided into 2 wings, east and west. Aoko had been given the entire east wing, but 2 rooms were more than enough as far as she was concerned. She had no desire to open a door that would trap you in a storybook world or lead to an attic that had only been used for storage these last 5 years. Aoko's room was at the end of the East Wing's long corridor. She had elected for a smaller room for no other reason other than that she thought it would be easier to clean. It was furnished with a large bed, her beloved mahogany desk, a wardrobe and chest for her clothes, and 2 9-shelf bookcases. That is all she brought with her from home. Her entire life of 16 years reduced to this. She borrowed the next room down for her own purposes.
そうだ、アリスにもらった見張りと壊れてないかチェックしないと。
She needed to see if the project she had been working on all night had borne fruit. The study next door served as proof of the life she had been living for the last year and how different that life was from the one she had lived before. It was not a room for the person she had been. It was a room for the person she would eventually become. A place of solitude that only she could enter. Or so she thought.
うわ、壊れてるどころか跡形もなく消え去ってる。やっぱ自己流アレンジはまだ早かったか。いいわよ、笑いなさいよ、コマドリ。
The nosy neighbor that had intruded upon her sanctuary flew away. While not exceptionally talented, Aoko did not lack for effort and was not afraid to fail. One could have almost mistaken her approach for optimism. She changed out of her uniform and returned to the first floor. Down the stairs, she opened the door to the east wing into the corridor as dark as a cellar. The absence of windows meant it was pitch black without the lights on. So she flicked the switch and entered the nearby doorway. It had been her idea to update the drawing room. The walls were decorated with extravagant patterns, and around the room were large majestic sofas, and a luxurious Persian rug. Amidst it all was a 30-inch television that seemed completely out of place. It stood looking over the other furniture like the emperor with no clothes. The mansion's owner would have rather done without it, but to a commoner like Aoko, it was an essential commodity. They had fought over its presence at first, but eventually came to an agreement and now mutually enjoyed this modern comfort.
なんだ、人のことは言えないか。うちも案外時代錯誤な家だった。
Now in a somewhat pleasant mood, she decided to brew some tea. She boiled some water in the kitchen, prepared a teapot, and made herself some black tea. With a flop, she sank into the sofa. She took a sip of her tea, then another. Lulled by the ticking of the clock, she took a third sip, as she pondered how to spend her afternoon. Es ist Nacht. The sofa almost seemed to be inviting her, and she sunk even further into its comforting embrace. Eingepennt. Aoko blurrily opened her eyes as she lifted her body up from the cushions. Alice, nehme ich an? This was no dream or a delusion. At some point, a girl had sat down across from her. Not the least bit surprised, she reached for the teacup. But the tea within had gone completely cold.
寝てた。
Yeah. She asked the question to the girl on the other side of the table.
ええ。
The girl answered without lifting her gaze. When silent, she could have been mistaken for a beautiful doll. The girl sitting on the opposite sofa was reading an old book. She had delicate limbs and pale white skin. Not a hint of humanity emanated from her melancholic aura. She had darker hair than Aoko, and her icy eyes were focused on the pages in front of her. Her clothes resembled that of a nun, but were actually her school uniform. Okay, interessante Schule. In Aoko's humble opinion, the gloominess suited her. She awoke something like out of a painting. There was something unreal about her, as she were frozen in time. The white on her cheek was so lovely that even Aoko found herself enchanted by it. The girl was one of the haunted house's 2 residents. Her name was Alice Kuonji, and she was the same age as Aoko.